Buju, wago shindagu migizi indodem, gazaga squaji mekag, indunjiba. Today I'd like to share a little bit about a concept in the Ojibwe language that often causes confusion. And the concept is the difference between animate and inanimate. I think the biggest confusion is caused simply by the use of the English word animate and the English word inanimate. Because in English, animate means alive and inanimate means not alive. I really wish that early linguists who are doing work with Ojibwe would have picked different English terminology for these categories in the language. And we could have called them red and blue or something. And it would have been helpful because it would have eliminated one of the big confusions about them. It is true that these two categories are very distinct. There are four main verb types in Ojibwe. Two of them are with regard to what we often call animate verbs, and the other two for the inanimate ones. However, there's been a tendency for those outside of the language community to ascribe different meanings based upon those English language words and their associations with these categories in the language. For example, in Ojibwe, a rock is animate. The sun is animate. The moon is animate, and so forth. And a lot of times this will resonate with people, native and not, to say, hey, it's not just the human beings who are alive. All kinds of things have life. And see, it's reflected in the language. The only problem with that is you have to look at the whole language, not just the examples that speak to that thinking. So, for example, about half of our body parts are animate and half inanimate. About half of the foods we eat are animate and half are inanimate, and it's not always the ones that you would think. For example, with body parts, the really important ones, like my brain and my heart, these are inanimate. But my shoulder is animate. With foods, it's not just the super sacred ones: wild rice, blueberries, and strawberries. All three of those, wild rice, blueberries, and strawberries, are all inanimate, but raspberries are animate. And the same is true with many other food items. Bread and fry bread are animate. And so there isn't a perfect logic. And the category animate or inanimate, as it's used in the English language when English is being used to speak about Ojibwe, does not tell you more important or less important. So I just want to put this out there that those categories are significant, but they do not mean more or less important or even more or less alive. That's a problem with English language vocabulary. There is structure to what is considered animate and inanimate. So, for example, most items that are associated with the winter tend to be animate. For example, snow is animate, goon. Same thing with snowshoes, animate. Skis and skates. With most other winter things, the nouns tend to be animate and the verbs used to describe them. Most things that are associated with the summer tend to be inanimate. For example, water is inanimate. So water's inanimate, but snow is animate. And this tends to be a pattern, except we don't know exactly why it happens to work this way. By the way, new technologies, for the most part, will have some variation in how they're treated in the language, and words whose usage have changed over time may have some dialect variation with how they are used. For example, the word odaban, which we use for a car, it actually used to be used just for a sleigh and was always animate. Odabanug is the plural, animate. However, we shifted the usage of that word to apply to any kind of vehicular transportation, so usually used now in reference to a car. And if you want to clarify that something is a sleigh, we'll use a word like zhushkodaban to clarify that it is a winter sliding sleigh as opposed to a car. For some of the northern dialects of Ojibwe, the word for car, odaban, same word as for the southern dialects, will actually be inanimate, whereas a zhushkodaban for a winter sleigh will be animate. So I think there is a pattern that this pattern of winter and summer associations is affecting words when their usage changes, which shows us the dialect variation that we will see sometimes within animacy. So all of that probably is not clarified, exactly why things are what they are. This is still a mystery, and someday someone is going to write a great dissertation, discover the pattern, nail it down, and I'm going to sleep even better at night. But until then, I do think it's important that we understand that these categories in the language are real and affect how we speak throughout the language, but they do not necessarily ascribe the meaning of more important and less important to the words that we use. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, resources for the Ojibwe language, teachers, and more. Miigwech.